He is basically the founder of the Unconventionalist podcast. So he kind of interviews entrepreneurs and interesting people for a living. And he's got a lot of side hustles on the go as well. But yeah, without any further ado, please give Mark Leruste a big round of applause.
I felt like running and high-fiving everyone like Tony Robbins kind of style. How's everyone doing? Yeah? Yeah, cool. Like, yeah, a little bit like, who the hell is this bearded guy coming on stage? Yeah? Who here was at the Chris Guillebeau event? Yeah, okay, cool. So you know I make terrible jokes, so please laugh and help me out here. So I'm really excited to speak with you. And this is a talk I've actually never given before. And it's a talk that I find that since I quit my full-time job about a year ago has become more and more relevant in the conversations I've had with founders and startups and small business owners. And actually I'm going to take you back to a moment where a few years ago when I was the country manager of the Movember Foundation in Spain, the men's health organization that gets men to grow moustaches in November to raise awareness for prostate cancer. And I was sitting at a bar with a fundraiser who'd become the highest fundraiser in Spain at the ripe age of 21. And he was studying at a business school. And he looked at me and we were having a few beers and he said, you know, Mark, I feel like a bit of a loser. And my colleagues and I feel a bit of losers because none of us are startup founders. And I said, what do you mean? And he was like, well, it seems that, you know, the only way that you can make it in life these days is if you're becoming the next entrepreneur, the next founder of Snapchat, or, you know, the next unicorn that you can mention. And I just thought, that's really weird. What do you make up the life of an entrepreneur is? And so we got in this conversation over a couple of more beers, and I realized that there's this tendency of the rise of the superstar entrepreneur. And that's the kind of the entrepreneur that you hear the stories about who gets filmed, a bit like what's happening right now, on a constant basis, but really like keeps on saying like, you know, here's the 6-figure income that I'm making and I've made $3 billion in 6 months and I'm going to teach you what you can do, and, you know, this completely ludicrous J-curve startup. And I realized that actually that perception was so far removed from the truth. In fact, when I started looking into the sort of statistics and studies, there's a Visa Europe study that was performed that looked at 1 out of 3 people want to start a business, but only 1 out of 10 actually take the leap. And so that leaves sometimes people who don't start a business feeling like a bit of a loser, because they're like, the only way that I can have the freedom and financial means to my dreams is to become my own entrepreneur, to be my own boss. But then the reality is sometimes a little bit different. If some of you have already started taking action, got your landing page, and you're starting like collecting people's emails and doing your MVPs and you're putting yourself out there, then you'll know it's tough, because sometimes you get crickets. You put a tweet out, no one responds. You put a survey out, apart from your mum, who responds, it gets a bit awkward, right? And so I started thinking, okay, so there's all these people want to start a business. But then I looked a little bit deeper. And actually Bloomberg came out with a study that found that 8 out of 10 entrepreneurs fail within the first 18 months. And there's a study by the Professor Freeman, who studies a clinical psychologist at the University of California, that studied the link between entrepreneurship and mental health. And he found that actually 1 in 3 entrepreneurs was experiencing depression. And over 48% had said that they'd experienced some sort of mental health issues. So I was kind of going, wait a minute, this is insane. Not only are the people starting businesses going through this immense journey of hardship, of pain, of suffering, but why are we hearing this? You know, why are we talking about this? Well, because tears don't sell. And when it comes down to talking about entrepreneurship, it's much better to talk about the dream, the aspirational lifestyle. And so, yeah, we buy into it. And then we get into this ritual of starting and we realize that actually it's not as easy as we thought it would be. And we start maybe comparing ourselves to others and think that maybe we are losers. And so I looked into this. Why is it still, knowing all these facts, that last year in 2016, UK had a record growth in terms of new businesses? In fact, it was a 36% increase since 2012. And to put you in perspective, we had 75 new businesses every hour in the UK last year. 75 new businesses every hour. And suddenly like, okay, I'm thinking about businesses, you know, all these big corporates. Well, actually, out of the 5.5 million businesses in the UK, 76% are run by solo entrepreneurs. That means that 4.6 million people, which represents 15% of the entire working population, by the way, are alone. That's nuts. That's crazy. That means that all of us are in our corners trying to make it happen. And so then you come together in a kind of community like this and you get a bit of support. So is this something new? Is this something that we were born with? Well, it turns out if you look back at history, there's a great story of a man who was born in Ireland in 1874. And his father was a doctor, and his job took them over to London. And so at 16, against the will of his father, he didn't go and become a doctor, but rather joined the merchant navies. And in 1901, was chosen to go as part of a British exploration to the South Pole. And he had to come back because of an injury. But he got the taste of what it was like to go on an exploration, on an adventure. And so, eventually, he went off on his own adventure. And you might have heard his name. It's often thrown in leadership case studies. His name was Ernest Shackleton. And he came up with an advert in the Times before his second exploration. And I want to read it out because I don't want to butcher it. And I didn't have time to learn it heart by heart. Men wanted for hazardous journey to the South Pole. Small wages, bitter cold, constant danger, safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. Now, if I hadn't told you that this was back in 1908, I could have told you that this was the journey of any one of you here. Any startup that I've ever come across, it pretty much sounds the same thing. So then you go, okay, Mark, great, that was about 100 years ago. Like, times have changed today. Well, actually, have they? In 2013, Mission 1, which is a Dutch controversial company, private company, that basically came out with the idea that by 2023, they would put a permanent settlement of humans on Mars. 2 women, 2 men. And eventually, 2 years later, they'd send 4 more. The catch? There was no expected return. 200,000 people applied to be part of the 4 first settlement. 200,000 people! Now, of course, you could go, yeah, Mark, okay, they're all suicidal. The fact is, they're not all suicidal. They believed in this crazy mission, in this crazy quest. And you look at Elon Musk, if you talk to his biographer, he'll tell you that Elon Musk is genuinely serious about coming up with a backup plan for humanity, and his backup plan is a permanent settlement on Mars. That's when he wakes up. That's what keeps him up at night. And so what I want to speak to you today about is this concept of quests. And if you're here today, I don't know you personally, but my guess is that there was something inside of you that was calling you. Maybe it was your own personal South Pole. And what I forgot to mention, in the advert that Ernest Shackleton put out, 5,000 people responded. And he put them into 3 different groups: mad, hopeless, and potential. And so sometimes when we're on this journey, we never know in which one we are. Are we mad? Is there hope? Or is there potential? And that is the single hardest question to ask when we get started on a journey. Now, why I'm particularly excited about speaking to you today is that one thing I've looked at over the last 10 years of interviewing some of the most inspiring people I've come across, doesn't matter if they're entrepreneurs, they're politicians like Nelson Mandela's right-hand man, or meeting people like Tim Ferriss or speaking to Bernie Brown. And what I've come to learn about what separates those who dream with those who do is actually not what I thought it was. I made up it was because they were special. They had a skill. Or surely they held a secret sauce that all of us just wanted to get a piece of. Well, the sad reality is that it was very different. It was neither of those. It was their ability to take action even if they had no idea of the outcome. It was their ability to surrender to uncertainty and not make up they needed to have all the answers before they started. Now, I know how hard that is. In fact, if you look at the science, we are hardwired for certainty and clarity. Because above all else, our brain wants to make sure that we avoid pain, seek pleasure, and minimize energy consumption. That's why when you've got these bold ideas and you get so excited, you then get hit by 1,000 voices telling you to do the opposite. We just come built in with a safety mechanism that tries to prevent us. But every single one of you here are either in the crazy category, in the hopeless category, or in the maybes. And that's what I find so exciting. And so I guess what I want to sort of leave with you is this concept that I have not yet come across a single entrepreneur or business owner or project starter that hasn't gone through real difficult moments. In fact, there's a U theory, maybe some of you have heard about it, but basically the U theory is expected in any given journey. And that means you start with an excitement, and then you go through a dip, or the reality kicks in. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to, I've got a story I have to tell you, remind me. You realize that actually you're gonna have to get up at 6 a.m. to deliver those croissants that you've baked all night. And that involves actually a bit of effort. And it was fun when you were part of the tribe because it was exciting, you got high fives and chest bumps, but then you're alone. You know, you're back in your kitchen. And you're like, should I be doing this? Well, I can't answer that question for you. In fact, I can't tell you what clarity looks like, but I can tell you what excitement feels like. And if there's anything that gets you excited, know that it will not be exciting every day. I often talk about relationships. Who's here been in a relationship before? Anyone been in a relationship? Yeah, yeah. So my guess is if you've been in relationships, you've been maybe through a few relationships. And I'm not putting any judgment on anyone. But the truth is, when you first date someone, it's really exciting. It's like the honeymoon phase. You're like, oh my God, he or she's amazing. You know, she makes me laugh, or he makes me laugh, or I love the way that he asks me questions about how my day was at work. And then after a little while, what happens? Oh, you notice that actually, every time they go to the toilet, they leave maybe the seat up. Or maybe she kind of doesn't really close the jar of the jam jar or the peanut butter, and it kind of dries up and it really pisses you off. And so then you go through this phase of like, ooh, I'm seeing everything that I wasn't aware of before we started. Had I known, maybe I wouldn't have started. But if you find that kind of really special person, and for whatever reason, you hate to love him or you hate to love her, you stick it up. You make it work. And I haven't met a single relationship that's come back to me and said, oh, it's been amazing. The entire 20, 30, 40 years of our lives together. The difference with the startup idea is that you get to do this over and over again. Don't be too attached if this is the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life. Don't be too attached if the next 5 or 6 years it has to look a certain way. Date your idea. Know that you're going to go for the dip. And ask yourself, am I today in the crazy, in the hopeless, or in the maybes? And if the answer is more often than none, in the hopeful or the maybes, then you're on the good track. And the last one I'm going to leave with you is how I came across the Escape the City. And a few years ago, I had many business ideas. In fact, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I would just write down all these crazy ideas that I had, from teaching people how to have table manners to helping, seriously, it was all about service-based businesses, right? Something that, you would really need. How to wear unmatching socks and whatever. Anyway, so I came up with like 400 different business ideas, and I gave myself a challenge. And the challenge was, can you start any business in 7 days with £100? And so I kind of went through the idea and I kind of randomly picked one. And I picked one about building a plant-based protein shake. There's a whole story as to why I ended up with that. I'm not vegan, but I'll tell you all about that later. And so I decided, okay, 7 days starting now. I went through the biggest emotional roller coaster of my life. I had a full-time job and I was trying to get up at 6 a.m. doing recipes of this shitty smoothie that tasted horrible to try and come up with a recipe. I hadn't told Escape the City, by the way, that I was going to attend a festival in the woods and I intended to flock my entire stock of protein shakes to the hopeful attendees. And so I hustled, I'm sure it's a word that you've heard around, hustle. And I got an ice box and I filled it up with 42 protein shakes. And the night before I did that, I had a meltdown. I was going to give it all up. I was ready to throw in the towel. And at the time, my ex-girlfriend said, what's the problem? It's like, I can't find a freaking recipe that doesn't taste like absolute shit. And so she said, but why don't you just Google it? Why don't you just look at the recipe? Why the need to reinvent the wheel? And I'd let my ego make up that I needed to be creative and different and unique. So I Googled a few recipes, tested them out, they worked. Bottled them up, 42 shakes, put them in this ice box. I then dragged this ice box across London during peak rush hour on a Friday afternoon. Everybody hated me. And by the time I made 2.5 hours of a journey through commute and trains, I got to the woods and I called Ben. I think Ben came back from an event and I said to him, I've got this idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm thinking about selling these protein shakes. And he said, oh my God, amazing, cool. How about you open up the night? I was like, oh shit, I don't even have labels on then. And so everything came together. I had a girl who helped out, printed out some labels. It was just this phenomenal experience. But what I want to say is this. I got on stage, I grabbed the mic, and I told them this crazy story that I had 7 days ago with £100, and I came up to £96. In that event, I sold out my 42 shakes, and I made £9 profit. And that was the most excited I'd ever felt in my entire life of slavery for £9. And so the praises and the social media feeds, and do you know who Alistair Humphreys is? Has anybody heard about him? He's an explorer, British explorer of the year, National Geographic. He actually went on stage and he took my shake and he said in front of everyone, before every talk I give, I always have a heaven shake. And the whole crowd went like live and raw, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so famous. I'm gonna make millions. And so what happened with Heaven Shakes is that I realized that I didn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. every day, and I didn't want to make shakes, and I didn't want to deliver them at offices for breakfast. The plan was great, but the implementation was pretty crap. But what I learned from that was so much more richer than the outcome. It was about surrendering to the experience, and that's what I want for you. I want you to forget about the outcome, forget about what it's supposed to look like. Stop freaking looking at Gary Vaynerchuk's daily vlogs of how amazing his life is, and start focusing on having some fun. Because if there's one thing I've noticed about this journey is that it can get quickly not so fun. That's not really English, is it? Seek for help and embrace the quest. Thank you so much.